Welcome back to the Fertility Friday podcast. I have some exciting news to share with you today. Your opportunity to learn fertility awareness with me is here. Registration for Fertility Awareness Mastery Live is open, and we're starting in just a few weeks, actually on October 31st. This is my group coaching program for women who want to balance hormones, boost progesterone, banish PMS, eliminate period pain, optimize fertility, all the things, through the power of cycle charting. FAM Live teaches you to use the menstrual cycle as a vital sign. You'll leave this program not only with a solid understanding of the symptothermal method for birth control and conception, but with a completely new relationship with your body and your cycles. We keep the group small so we can better support each of you, so spaces are limited. Apply now at fertilityfriday.com/FAM. That's fertilityfriday.com/FAM. This is the Fertility Friday podcast, episode number 492. Today, I'm sharing my interview with Serrita, one of the members of my Fertility Awareness Mastery Live group coaching program. And we're really getting into the particulars of using the fertility awareness method for conception and also for using charting as a way to identify hormonal imbalances. So really using it as a diagnostic. And in her case, working toward improving progesterone, which is a huge topic. As soon as you start charting and you can actually see on the chart what's happening with your estrogen and progesterone levels indirectly through mucus patterns and through the length of your overall cycle and ovulation and the luteal phase, you really quickly start to see what's happening with your hormones. And so it's quite common to then see if you're having issues with progesterone production or potentially other hormonal imbalances. And so we really dive into that today. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into our call with Serrita. And I'm excited to be here today with Serrita. Serrita is a member of my current Fertility Awareness Mastery Live group program. And at the time of this recording, we're, I think, maybe 3/4 of the way through. I always find that it takes the time it takes, like it is about, 2.5, 3 months, but it still feels always so fast as we go through week by week. But this is a good stage, I think, because you've gone through kind of the bulk of the program. We've had a few hot seats together. I have a general sense of what's going on, which is always nice. But yeah, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. I've been a fan for years of your show, so I'm very excited.
Well, I always say it, so I'm a broken record over here, but I really do love these episodes. My heart is with women and supporting us to do the things we need to do. And of course, from my perspective, cycle charting plays a central role in that, because once we understand what's happening in our cycle, I feel like it gives us so many choices, regardless of what our goals are. So really happy to have you here. And I also always recognize that everybody doesn't want to go on the podcast and share their story. So I'm always really thankful for the women who are comfortable doing that. So with that said, I'd love to jump right in and ask you my favorite question, which is, how old were you when you had your first period? And let us know a little bit about what that journey was like for you, if you have used hormonal contraceptives before, and what basically led you to use fertility awareness now.
Yeah, absolutely. I had my first period when I was about 12 years old, hoping that it was coming, because I knew that was all of my friends around me were starting to have their periods. So I was like, oh, is it going to be my turn soon? And so that was pretty smooth. I never really, in the early days, it wasn't really bothersome for me. It was just mostly about being prepared and making sure that you had the right pads and all of that when you go to school and that kind of thing. So it really wasn't a painful period for me in the early days, and maybe a Tylenol here and there, but nothing that was too out of the ordinary or that was debilitating for me in any regard. When I started to, get into my 20s, I didn't really start birth control until possibly in my late 20s. That's when I started to my mid 20s. And I got introduced to it from my dermatologist, actually, because I was still suffering from cystic acne. And she was like, in addition to, you did a couple of bouts of Accutane, so let's go ahead and try to control your acne with birth control. And that's when I got introduced to the ortho tricycling. Did that for about 2 cycles of having it. And then I was just like, I didn't really see a change too much for me. And I was like, why am I taking these pills? I started to experience some weight gain, and my breast started to grow. And it was like, do I need to get a new bra? What's happening? And she was like, oh no, this is part of the process. And, just give it time, give it time, give it time. And by the second pack, I didn't really see much change in my acne, but I did see changes in my body. I was like, well, there's got to be a better way. So I decided to find another dermatologist. I revisited the birth control when I got into my later 20s, when I started to get into a serious relationship. I was like, okay, well, let me go ahead and try to get on something that, from a contraceptive perspective, that it's a little bit more predictive. Was on the same birth control. I switched that from the ortho tricycling to the low, but so basically the same concept. And that when that relationship was over, I decided, what's the point of me having to take the birth control, because it was just a reminder that I wasn't in a relationship. So I stopped it. And so that pretty much was my cycle. So every time I got into a long-term relationship, I would start on the birth control again. And then if it happened to end, I would just kind of trail it off. So I was never consistently on birth control throughout my whole adult life. It just was when I needed it, and let me give it a shot. And then I would just kind of get off of it, kind of a thing.
Well, yeah, no, that's interesting. It's interesting to hear the different ways that women approach birth control. After all these years having these conversations, it's so clear how central this is for us. It's this thing that we always have to figure out. And it depends too, because you might be with a partner who's comfortable with a certain thing, and then you have a new partner who maybe isn't comfortable with that thing, and then you know what I mean? But ultimately the bulk of that burden tends to fall obviously on us to sort it out. And it's kind of this lifelong thing. So for some women, I think also it's interesting for women who start using it older. So for you, the first experience you had with it was in your mid-20s. So that means
exactly.
you had your cycles from 12 to mid-20. So more than a decade. So you kind of are, regardless of whether you're charting or not, if you're cycling, you have a sense of your body. You kind of know. Even if you're not really paying attention in this detailed way that we're doing, you still kind of know. And so you notice a shift, you notice a change. I think this is something that's different for women who started later. And interestingly, you weren't using it for birth control at that time. So it was kind of like, maybe if you had been, you would have put up with the changes, but because you weren't,
right,
and it wasn't really doing what you were hoping with the acne, it's kind of like, well, why? And quite quickly, actually,
right.
2 cycles.
Yeah, just 2 cycles, because I was like, I'm pretty adverse to like taking things to begin with. And I'm like, if I'm kind of the person where I need to start to see things happen. And if I'm like, if I'm not experiencing what I was told I would, then I'm not going to keep giving it a chance. I'm not going to give it months and months and months and months. That's just too much time for me.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And then again, there's different ways to approach this. So certainly some women just are on the pill and they're just on it. But I've heard many women, or other contraceptive, but I've heard many women say what you're saying, which is like, okay, I went on it when I needed it. And then if I keep taking it, it's just a reminder that I'm no longer in this relationship.
Exactly.
So, well,
exactly.
Yes, exactly. So I think, that's why I love highlighting all these different approaches. And so in your experience, looking back at the years, were your cycles fairly normal and consistent? Like, so you would come off the pill, would they come back and just be kind of like they were before? Was that kind of your experience?
That was my experience. It was always a situation where I never had a gap in me not having my period. And in fact, when I was on the pill, I can remember, the days when you had to take the sugar pill, my period would always start a couple of days later. So it was never on track with what the pills needed to be. So it was like either a little bit later or what have you. And it just, things were just in an alignment, and that was annoying. We're not in alignment with the pills that I was taking. And so that annoyed me. But even when I was on it, I never had an issue as far as my cycles and the regularities as to when it came.
Okay. Well, then share with us a little bit about the lead up to utilizing fertility awareness now. In your case, you're actively trying to conceive. And so maybe share with us a little bit about your journey. You have a daughter, age 3.
Yes, I do have a daughter. Yeah. So how I got introduced to your podcast specifically was I was in the midst of me trying to conceive my daughter or to get pregnant. And I got married pretty late in my late 30s. You know, my husband and I had made the decision that we wanted to start right away. We had had a miscarriage where it was like, okay, well, we're just going to go ahead and try again. And then after we had gotten married, we got pregnant very quickly. But unfortunately, that ended in a stillbirth where I was diagnosed with an incompetent cervix. So that was very interesting for me to hear, and went through the process of me getting a permanent transvaginal cerclage and trying to try it naturally again. And things weren't really happening in the next couple of months. And so I made a decision when I was about 38, going into my 39, to go ahead and try to explore IVF. And it was really a hard decision for me because it was like, well, we were able to get pregnant in the past and that never really was an issue. But just because I was getting closer and closer to 40, I thought it was a best shot for me. And plus I wanted to take advantage of some of the scientific advancements that happened, or that was a part of that, to make sure that we had a genetically sound baby and to reduce the possibility of having a miscarriage if at all possible. And so went through that route and was able to conceive my daughter through that, and then had an extra embryo as a result of that. But all the while after she was born and everything, it was like, well, as soon as she was born, my doctor was like, well, you know, at my 6-week checkup, she's like, let's go ahead and get you on to birth control. And I was like, well, I'm still nursing. I don't really want to do that because I didn't really want to put anything into my body that might potentially affect her and her development. So we just continued to use the pull-out method, and well, not at 6 weeks because it definitely wasn't happening there. But once it got to a point when I felt comfortable enough to have sex again, then that's the method that we chose, the method of contraception that we chose to move forward with. So when we decided that, okay, well, we wanted to give her a sibling, we had an embryo frozen and decided to go ahead and go through the route of doing the frozen embryo transfer again. Unfortunately, that one ended in a miscarriage as well. And so then I was like, well, let me just go ahead and really buckle down. In the back of my mind, as I'm always listening to your podcast, I'm like, well, let me see about this. Let me see about this. Is this actually something that I can move forward with? Because I never really knew when I ovulated. I knew how long my periods were. I was very consistent in having a 25-day cycle. But in terms of being able to time the sex appropriately to give it the best shot, I had no idea when that was. I've used ovulation kits before, but it really wasn't, I don't know. I just either didn't know how to use it properly or what. So I was like, okay, well, Lisa always talks about the fertility awareness method. I'm going to go ahead and sign up for her class. It just was in perfect alignment because after I was going through my miscarriage, you had started the announcements of the next class starting. And so I was like, okay, well, let me go ahead and join her class so that I can really get an understanding of what's going on with my body, use the fertility awareness method so that I can know when I'm ovulating, and then understand what to do so that I can give myself the best natural chance.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for sharing your story. I'm so sorry for your loss. Miscarriage is always heartbreaking, but stillbirth adds another layer of just trauma. So I do hope that you and your partner have recovered and healed as much as you can from that traumatic experience.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, we've done the things that we needed to in order for us to get over that mental health. And that was one of the things that I wanted to make sure as well after my last miscarriage was, am I really in the best mental state for me do I have any mental blockers? Is there anything? So I actually sought out going to some therapy for a couple of times, and she assured me of some things, and I, went through some practices on my own. And so wanted to make sure that I was clear on that front. Am I clear on the physical? And now taking it to the next level of trying again and utilizing the fertility awareness method.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think just to touch on one last thing, when you went to that 6-week appointment after you had
Mm-hmm.
struggled to conceive, and you
Mm-hmm.
had conceived, you'd had miscarriages, and you needed IVF in this case to conceive your daughter. This is a conversation I often have with my clients postpartum because it probably hadn't even entered into your mind. In terms of like, look how much I had to go through to get to this point, and now you're telling me to go on the pill because I need birth control. Like, it's kind of like a mind warp. But sometimes it can happen where after you've had a baby, it can happen easier for a period of time. So it is a thing, but I just wanted to touch on that because it's like a mind warp to kind of go from having struggles to conceive to having someone tell you to go on birth control.
Absolutely. And then for me, in my instance, I was always told that as long as you breastfeed, then you're not going to have a cycle. I'd had friends who had breastfed for like a year or 2 years and they didn't have a cycle. But for me, 9 weeks later,
Oh, wow.
I started menstruating again. So I was just like, what is going on? Why am I not like everybody else in this instance? So yes, it was definitely in the back of my mind in terms of, okay, well, obviously I'm ovulating again. And so this is another thing I have to worry about.
Yeah. That's a whole conversation about breastfeeding as birth control. And so for anyone who's like the long and short of it, just to give a little snippet, and I'll link some previous podcast episodes about postpartum charting because I get this question all the time. At some point I will be doing a postpartum series because I get so many questions about it on the podcast, but it's variable. So that's the answer is it's variable. So it's, everyone who breastfeeds obviously does not just not get their period back for a year. So I don't even know if there's an average. If you're not breastfeeding, you can get your period back as early as like 35 days postpartum.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you're not breastfeeding, you can get your period back very, very fast. Some women get their period back within 2 weeks, 2 months, not 2 weeks, 2 months when they're breastfeeding, 3 months, some 4 months, 6 months, 8 months, 9 months, and some a year or more. So there's a lot of variation there. So we'll just leave it at that.
Mm-hmm.
You're not abnormal, but there's, and it's not normal to just not have your period for 2 years. There is a point where
it's not.
No. Yeah. There's a point because by the time think about your 2-year-old, how much food is your 2-year? Okay. So so when your child is 2, even if you're still breastfeeding, I mean, for anyone, I breastfed both of mine until they were a little older than 2, which is all interesting because my husband's like, if they could ask for it. So he was supportive, but up to a point, he was like, we're going to have to stop this. And this is not about judgment or whatever. It's just about, his comfort versus mine and the conversations that took place. So everyone makes that decision. But my point is that when you're breastfeeding a 2-year-old, half the time it's comfort, right? Like they're just coming up to you and just like, suck, run off. So
exactly.
Long story short, often it's not necessarily the reason that you're not getting your period anymore by then. So we do at some point have to look at other factors and make sure you're good and healthy and all that good stuff. Well, we can switch over to the session part of our session today. I know we have quite a few topics we can talk about. I'll just pull up your charts. Of course, the listeners will not be able to see those, but we'll do our best as usual. And so let me know where you'd like to start, what you want to focus on today. I know you had a couple questions about some of your observations and things.
Yeah. So looking at my latest chart now, so I'm still struggling with how to draw the baseline, right? So where the on the latest one, did I not send you? Yeah, this is the latest one. So basically where I am right now, things are kind of pretty consistent in the sense of, okay, well, this is where it is.
Did you
how
want
do
to
you
send me the updated? I think this one was from last week, so you probably have another week worth of data for me.
Yeah, I sent an email.
Okay, let me check.
Okay.
There's a lot of things. There you are. You sent it today.
Yeah.
All right.
I was like, it looks a little short, but
yes, we need to add the other one on there. Question is, will my computer cooperate? Okay, so here we are.
Yes.
All right. So before I get into it, tell me a little bit about the observation on cycle day 10. Do you remember what that looked like?
Yeah, so with cycle day 10, what happened was it was still a smooth sensation, but I wasn't able to pull up anything off of the toilet paper.
Okay. And then was it shiny on the toilet paper?
It was shiny on the toilet paper.
Okay. So we'll get into some of the nitty gritty here. So if we go back to our last hot seat, when I was going through some of the notations, so in the sensation box, moving forward, I'll encourage you to just write the letter. So either dry, smooth, or lubricative. So in the sensation box, let's only have the sensation. So none of the notations. And then in the notations box, let's have the notations. So for example, let me just see if I can do a little bit of, I call it arts and crafts when I'm drawing on the chart. As everyone knows who's in the class and laughs at me. So this would be like smooth. And then I think we had talked about this last time, it would have been, so for the listeners, I teach the wiping method, which is basically you have a piece of toilet paper and you wipe from front to back and you identify the sensation. And the sensation refers to how it actually feels when you're wiping. So that's just the nitty gritty method stuff. And there's different ways to do it, but this is just the way I teach it. So in this scenario, is this correct, Serrita, what I'm doing there?
Yes.
Sensation. And then the cervical fluid was clear. It didn't stretch very much, but it was clear. So this is, I'm just writing it on here for Serrita so that she can kind of see what I'm getting at. Because a part of all of this stuff is to kind of note it correctly. And the reason why we care about the notations is because once we get down what you're actually seeing, then we can see what the patterns are and all that good stuff. Okay, so this so far is representing what you were trying to mark. Okay, so then for this day 10, you're saying that it was shiny, but you couldn't pick anything up?
That is correct.
So I would mark that like this with the green instead.
Okay.
Only because you couldn't pick anything up.
Okay.
Okay, so that didn't work, but you get the gist.
Yes.
Just go with it. Okay, so what this means, so the reason that I wanted to just take time to go through it, so to paint a picture for the listener, we basically, Serrita had her period, and then she had one day before she started to see cervical fluid. Then she had 3 days of cervical fluid, and the fluid was kind of like clear and stretchy. And so the last day that she had cervical fluid that was clear and stretchy is cycle day 9. So that would mean that your peak day is on cycle day 9. And peak day is just the last day that you have mucus that's clear, stretchy, or lubricative. Peak day we care about because it's often highly correlated with ovulation. So often when you've identified that kind of last day of clear, stretchy, it's related to ovulation. So for some women, it's the day of ovulation or the day before or after. So we always want to pay attention to that last day of mucus in the cycle that's clear or stretchy. It's kind of, I think, a little bit hard to say because we don't, so in the cycle, we don't have, I know I don't actually necessarily recommend paying attention to those period temps. I often get the question too in my DMs and stuff like, well, what happens if my period temps are really high? And so when you're taking your temperature each morning, when you're on your period, that's a time of transition where you were going from the post-ovulatory phase of high temperatures to going to the pre-ovulatory phase. So often during your period itself, the temperatures are a little bit higher than normal, or at least they kind of go up and down quite a bit more. So in Serrita's case, she just didn't check them, which I think is a fine option. And so we have a couple of days to go on. So it's possible that ovulation happened around day 9. And it's possible that this temperature here could just be like an outlier. It's hard to say. You have a temperature on day 6, 98.3, which is kind of high for a pre-ov temp. So I think maybe, I don't know if you remember if there was anything happening on that day.
Yeah, I was having a bit of a cold that was passed on down from me from my daughter.
Good times. 3-year-olds.
Yeah. Yes.
Always bringing home the goodies.
Exactly. More colds than I ever thought that I would have.
Right? It works out your immune system for sure. It really highlights the need for all the things. In our house, we had to do all the things. Being in Canada and being a person of color, we're not getting any vitamin D up here. And so we're always taking our vitamin D. We're always trying to eat liver. Well, you already know that. For the vitamin A, immune boosting property, all that kind of good stuff. So you figure it out so that you don't have to be sick all the time.
Yes.
Little ones for you have all the germs. All right. So that kind of gives us a possible explanation then. So basically then we have cycle day 7 and 8, where the temperatures seem to be in a typical pre-ovulatory range. And then we go into what looks like a post-ovulatory temperature pattern. So if I compare your previous cycle, we had the baseline, which is the line that essentially divides the pre and post-op temps. We had the baseline somewhere around 97.8. I feel a little non-committal about this line. It could be 97.7. It could be 97.8. I like to compare because then we get a chance to see if it's, because cycle to cycle, it's not always exactly the same. But typically, for anyone who's charted, let's say 2, 3, 4 or more cycles, we tend to see that baseline kind of be similar from cycle to cycle, not always exactly the same. So that kind of is how I'm interpreting it. So in this chart here, I could put the baseline same place, like 97.8, 97.7.
Okay. And you're just basing that off of because of what it was previously, or is there something on this existing chart that is giving you,
a couple of, basically what I have to go on is these two temperatures on cycle day 7 and 8, which appear to be in your typical pre-ovulatory range. That's kind of what I have to go on, because the one temperature you have after your period is 98.3, which is typically a high pre-ov temp. Like that's not typical. So, and you mentioned that you were sick that day. So I circled it as a potential outlier. So it's a combination. These are judgment calls that come from experience, but it's a combination of looking at what we have to work with. And so for anyone who hasn't picked up on it, your cycle here, we're looking at earlier ovulation. So we're not looking at a day 14 ovulation here. It looks like ovulation likely happened on day 9 or 10 or something like that. So that also means that we just don't have as many pre-ovulatory temps to go by. What I'm also looking at, so I do look at the general trend. So again, in your previous chart, we see the baseline, I put it around 97.8. And we do see a clear trend that the majority of the temps before ovulation are below that line. And after ovulation, the temps are staying above that line. In this current cycle, after day 9, none of the temps are dropping below the 97.8 mark. They're all above it. We're also seeing that temperature match up with the peak day. So again, I do really look at the mucus as a valid biomarker. I always make sure that I don't ignore it. And so we see these 3 days of mucus that you've identified as clear and stretchy. And then afterwards, we see a change where you're marking nothing. You're not seeing any mucus. It's dry. So that is a shift. So these things together, the mucus pattern, the temperature shift, in combination with, like I said, the difference between like those pre-ovulatory temperatures and etc., plus comparing it to where the baseline was last cycle, those are the things this is why I'm marking that line there.
Okay.
And how do you feel about it? Where I'm marking possible ovulation, what were your thoughts on this chart?
I agree with you. I 100% agree with you. I always wanted to know, because again, I only have a 25-day cycle typically, in wanting to know when my ovulation was actually happening. Is it earlier? Is it later? And luckily, as we had talked about this before, I had stopped taking my antihistamines, so I was able to to give myself a chance to actually have some sort of observations that may be indicative of something going on. Whereas before, in my last cycle, I saw nothing because I was hitting the Claritin every day. I think that was a hindrance for me. So this time I'm actually able to see some things and which is very helpful.
Yeah, I remember we had that conversation, which obviously it's challenging on both fronts, because when you were taking the antihistamines, we're seeing all dry days. All of my screen just dropped, but that's okay. And then once you stop taking the antihistamines, you have to deal with the allergies. So we talked about a couple of potential solutions to that, but just a general, how are you doing with it? Like, now that you've dropped the antihistamines for a while, how are you surviving? Are you doing okay?
I'm doing okay. It was kind of touch and go for a minute because I was so used to my go-to, but I was like, okay, well, let me just try to suffer through it. It wasn't a situation where it was like, I had to, where it was so bad that, I was eyes watering or anything like that. It was more so the sneezing in the early morning and that kind of thing. So it was like, okay, well, let me just kind of suffer through it for a little while. I took your advice in taking some more other things like the NAC. That's I've seen a little bit of a difference with that as well. So that's definitely helped. So instead of me just going to my normal go-tos, I'm still able to function and not really be suffering so much.
Well, that's good news. It's tricky. Obviously, the goal is not to make you suffer.
Right.
Yeah. So we did talk about a couple of strategies to potentially minimize histamines and all that kind of stuff. So I'm glad that you're seeing some progress. But yeah, so the good news is that we are seeing mucus. Now, so what the listeners may have picked up on is that ovulation is happening a bit earlier in the cycle. You're in your early 40s. And so one of the things that we've spoken about in class is that how the cycle changes as we get into different reproductive stages. So it's not uncommon for women who are in that age range. I'm turning 40 this year, so I'm jumping into that age range right away here. But essentially, it's not uncommon to start seeing earlier ovulations at that time. And so that's something to watch for as well. Were you surprised to see how early ovulation was happening in this cycle? Like, was it kind of like, oh, wow, or were you kind of expecting that?
Yeah, no, I was kind of expecting that because I also noticed other things. Like I try to pay attention to other clues about my body. Like, am I feeling a little bit more friskier? Am I a little bit more free with things? And then it's a lot of times I notice too, my body temperature changes, or like if I'm perspiring a little bit more, what time of the month that is. So at this time, I was feeling more like I had a more sense to like have sex if I wanted to. And so that to me was telling me, in addition to what I was seeing from my observations, that maybe I am ovulating.
Jumping into today's episode with some exciting news. Your opportunity to learn fertility awareness with me is here. Registration is now open for my Fertility Awareness Mastery Live group coaching program. Classes start on October 31st. This is your opportunity to balance hormones, boost progesterone, banish PMS, eliminate period pain, optimize fertility, all the things, through the power of cycle charting. You'll leave this program not only with a solid understanding of the symptothermal method for birth control and conception, but with a completely new relationship with your body and your cycles. This program is the perfect combination of group coaching and individualized one-to-one support, giving you what you need to solve your period problems. We've been refining and improving this program for over 7 years. We have created an incredible experience that you won't get anywhere else. We keep the group small so that we can better support each of you, so spaces are limited. Apply now at fertilityfriday.com/FAM. That's fertilityfriday.com/FAM. Now let's go ahead and jump back into today's episode.
Well, and it's really important to understand the kind of primary factors that we pay attention to with fertility awareness, obviously the temperature and the cervical fluid, and if you want to, the optional cervical position, things like that. But it's also really helpful to look at some of those secondary signs, I would call them. So your libido is definitely, for many women, it's a secondary sign. Now, I recognize everybody isn't the same. And so not everybody necessarily feels the same way around ovulation. And some women don't feel the greatest around that time. But what I've seen with my eyes over 20 years is that the majority of women seem to have somewhat of an increase in libido around that time. It doesn't mean it's the only time that they're going to have an increase in libido.
Sure.
It's pretty common. And so those are things that are just as valid to pay attention to kind of corroborate your chart, what you're marking on there. And just a question, are you marking intimacy on the chart? I know with the app, you have to select it for it to export properly, but were you marking intimacy on the chart this cycle?
I was marking it, but I haven't had any.
Okay. Well, so I always ask the question because I want to kind of find out, right? Is it, if there's nothing on there, is it because it didn't export, or because you weren't marking it, or because there was no sex? So I don't like to assume.
No, yeah.
All right. And you had had some questions about clarifying your mucus, but did we kind of go through some of those, or did you, because I know you had a question of something that you saw that was, you said kind of creamy.
Yeah. So if I have in my past, after I got a sense that maybe I did ovulate, and this was before I was charting and all, that to have like a creamy, and this isn't like after intercourse or anything like that, but just like a creamy mucus observation where it was cloudy and I could definitely pick it up, and it looked like something that would come out of the nose as opposed to coming out of the other end. And so just wanted to get your insight into, like, is that, would I mark that? Is that, because I know that it would be after, right? So what would I do with that information?
It would be after ovulation, you mean?
Uh-huh.
Well, so I think interesting observation that it kind of looks like snot.
Yeah.
So again, I mean, the cervical crypts, they're mucous membranes, and so there is, it shouldn't be like snot, like yellow and gunky, but to get graphic, but
right.
but it is like that. So I think that it's helpful to kind of keep that in mind, right? Like, it is obviously different for a different purpose, but it does have similar qualities. So in terms of how you mark it, so again, I'm teaching the wiping method. And so there are some specificities. Again, I always say, it's not to say this is the right way, but this is the way that I teach. So there would be different ways to do this. So essentially what we're looking for when we're identifying mucus with this method is we'd be wiping before and after you go to the bathroom, and we would count something as mucus if we're able to pick it up off the toilet paper, essentially. So if you're wiping and you look at the toilet paper after, and then you can pick it up and stretch it, we ask 2 questions, which is, what color is it and how much does it stretch? And then we basically use those identifiers, descriptors, to identify it. So we have mucus in 2 categories, what we call peak and non-peak. And so essentially we have creamy type mucus, which looks like lotion. And then we have the clear stretchy that kind of looks like the raw egg white type. And so in this case, if you wipe and then there's something on the toilet paper that you can pick up, so kind of like lotiony stuff, lotiony snot, if you will, then that's when we consider it mucus. If you see something in your underwear, I typically encourage my clients to note that separately, because sometimes what you see in your underwear can just be vaginal cell slough, especially if you're doing the wiping method all day and you're wiping before and after you go to the bathroom all day and you're not seeing anything, but you have this little clump of lotiony stuff on on your underwear. It is helpful to kind of note that separately. So does any of that help so far?
Yes. And for where you would note it in the notes section of the app?
Well, yeah. So you don't have to, it's not mandatory, but I encourage my clients to consider that, especially when they're kind of confused, because I've seen a number of different scenarios. So I have some clients who really have a limited mucus, like they don't have very much at all, and they're really not seeing anything. I've had clients who only see stuff in their underwear or in an internal check. So, but I need to identify what their baseline is using the wiping method, because in a healthy cycle, you shouldn't have to send a search team to find this mucus. It should be there, and you should be able to see it when you're wiping. If you're not seeing anyone when you're wiping, from my perspective, I want to know that. So that's part of the reason from my perspective where I want to separate it out. So for some of my clients in that particular situation, they might do a separate line, like underwear observation on their chart, and then they actually write down what they see in their underwear, and we see if it actually corresponds to ovulation. So it's kind of like we observe what's happening in her body, and then we try to figure out, is this actually mucus? Is it cell slough? And this is kind of like the way we go about trying to interpret what is actually happening. So for some clients, if they do that, they'll see that it's just cell slough. They have it sometimes, but it doesn't really correspond with ovulation. But for other clients, if they're only seeing the underwear stuff around ovulation, then that is a different kind of thing, because then that can actually be a helpful observation. But from my seat, I want to figure that out, because ultimately we want to get your cycle to a place where you're having good mucus. Like, so for example, with your chart with the first one, it was all dry. And then we identified the histamine issue, and you took the plunge And now we're seeing mucus. So we kind of know like, okay, well, she doesn't have a problem making mucus. She was just using antihistamines. Yeah. So hopefully that helps. I'm coming at this at a little bit of a different strategy because not only are we wanting to identify the fertile window, in your case, to support conception, but for my other clients who are looking to avoid, we also want to figure out, are you healthy? Is your cycle normal? And if it's not, then we kind of need to know that it's not so that we can take steps to improve that mucus production if we need to.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, and so we have time for, there was a couple other topics. We might not be able to cover everything in today's session, but we had talked about boosting progesterone, and we also talked about going through potentially your partner's sperm results, recent sperm results. So what would you like to focus on?
Let's do the progesterone piece, because that's really close to home for me. When I was pregnant, also because of the fact that I had the stillbirth. As a result of that, my doctor had me on weekly progesterone shots, and as a preventative measure. And so it's really important to me to make sure that I do all the things, since I am wanting to conceive, how I could support myself in the post-ovulatory phase with a progesterone if need be, in a natural sense. And so I wanted to get some of your thoughts on some things that I could do or which might be helpful in that regard.
Okay, that sounds good. So first and foremost, I mean, what we have so far gathered data from your charting. I think within a couple of days, we'll have the second full chart. So that is something that gives us a good amount of insight just on a very basic level of what's happening with your progesterone. So in the previous cycle, we identified that the luteal phase was likely about 12 days. The ovulation, exact date of ovulation wasn't 100% clear, but we did our best to interpret. So it did meet the advanced rules. And so approximately 12 days, which is good. So a strong luteal phase is 12 days and higher. So 11 is borderline, 10 is short, 10 and lower. And so first and foremost, it's good. We're seeing ovulation happen. We're seeing it happen consistently. And we're seeing what looks to be like a strong luteal phase, which is a sign of good progesterone, because you can't really have a 12-day luteal without, I mean, if you have a 10-day luteal versus a 12-day luteal phase. And so for anyone who's not familiar with the lingo, luteal phase is just the word for the second half of the cycle, the post-ovulatory phase. So how many days in the cycle between ovulation and your next period? And so essentially, if you have during that time, the corpus luteum, which is what's left after ovulation. So after you ovulate, the follicle bursts open, and then you have the remaining tissue there, which forms into this corpus luteum, which then starts to make progesterone. So what you have during that phase is the progesterone has to be high enough to suppress cervical mucus production, but also to kind of maintain and continue to mature the uterine lining. And what happens when the progesterone isn't high enough is that you tend to have bleeding and a shorter luteal phase or spotting or increased PMS. And anyway, so that's more of an overview for the listener. And so having a 12-day luteal is a good sign, is basically what I'm saying. So that's a good sign. We've already done a couple of things we've discussed a couple of things in our work together that are helpful in the general sense to support progesterone. I know that one of the first things we had talked about was your training protocol. So you're doing a 6-week protocol with your trainer, which is awesome. And we had talked a little bit about ensuring that you're getting enough overall calories and protein. And I know you had made some shifts in your plans and everything to make that happen. So I'd say first and foremost, that is really helpful and important. I call them the foundational factors, but the first things that we need to do to ensure good progesterone production are basically we need to get enough sleep. That's really important. I just pulled up yes. Okay. So, and I'll share this handout with you, but basically one of the first things we need to do is ensure that you're getting enough sleep, making sure when we don't get enough sleep, we're not supporting our melatonin production. We can increase our cortisol production, and these things can have a negative effect on the luteal phase length. So like before we even get into all the different things to do, we want to do our best to get 7 or more hours of sleep in the dark each night. And did we talk about sleep? How do you sleep?
Well, so I'm not the greatest sleeper. because I drink water too late and I have to get up around 2 or so to go to the bathroom. And so it's not a consistent 7 to 8 hours for me. I usually get to bed about 10:30 and I wake up around 6:15 ish. But in the meantime, in between time, I do have the occasional get up and go to the bathroom or kind of toss and turn a little bit. So I would say if I were to put it on a scale of 0 to 10, 10 being the greatest, I'd say my sleep is about a 6.
Okay. Well, I mean, question for you. You're a mom of a 3-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
So have you thought about giving yourself a cutoff? I mean, it sounds simple, but sometimes we need someone to tell us to do that in terms of the water drink.
Yes. So it was part of my thing is that I want to get in my ounces of water, and sometimes I don't get it in early enough. So yes, I had thought about the idea of me cutting off my liquid supply about 8 p.m. and seeing how that would work. But then I haven't been meeting my water goal. So I can just cut it off for what it is and see if that would help my sleep. So, because it's, to your point, it's like a balance, right? So what's more important to me, or what's going to benefit me more, getting more sleep, not having to get up to go to the bathroom, not having that, or making the water goal and then I'm having to get up all the time. So,
well, what if we flip the water goal a little bit? You work out in the mornings. Is that right? At least at the current time. So
yes.
Is there anything that would preclude you from purposely drinking 2 tall glasses of water, maybe putting some lemon when you wake up?
No, not at all. Yeah, that's definitely a thing I can do.
And if you did like 1 or 2, just pound it back in the morning, which is actually really excellent for your body, hydrates you, supports your liver, especially if you put in some lemon in there. And it actually does you a lot of good to do that first thing in the morning, as a separate note. So if you were to do that and pound back, like don't go crazy, but like do like 2 nice glasses of water or something like that, like what they say, 8 to 10 ounces or something. But you know what I mean? Just how would that help you to reach your water goals?
I think that's definitely something that would benefit me for sure. I'll give that a shot. I'll try it tomorrow.
Well, yeah, because I want to support you to meet your goals, but at the same time, I don't want you to like shoot yourself in the foot while you're doing it.
Exactly.
Because we could get in that water, especially if you purposely get in a lot in the morning, then you can kind of just like, because then you kind of hit it right off the bat. And then the rest of the day, you're kind of like, I feel like it'd be easier to hit the goal anyways with that.
Yes.
So you're in good company. This is something, it's interesting though, because I've spoken to so many women over the years. And I mean, I do it a little bit too. I think at the time we're recording this, I'm 35 weeks pregnant. And so I have a baby jumping on my bladder. I think the baby's head is like literally right on the bladder all the time. And so things are a little different. I just don't have the capacity that I used to. And I've had to kind of make some of those choices too, because for whatever reason, I was always really thirsty at night. But if I'm pounding back 2 glasses of water at midnight, I'm not going to have a good sleep. And I'm already a little bit uncomfortable just in life right now. So just to kind of put that out there, because sometimes the easiest solution doesn't come to us right away. Right. But okay. But we want you to get good sleep. So the second question is, are you sleeping in the dark? Like, is your room actually pitch black, dark?
Yes, it is pitch black. I'm sleeping in the dark. So that's not an issue.
Okay. Excellent. So so that's a little tweak. We'll check in and see how that goes. But let's see if we can get that from a 6 out of 10 to like an 8 or 9, because you work, you have a family. We all need to just function better. It's hard out there.
Absolutely.
And that's one of the things that are actually really helpful and important to boost progesterone in the general sense. Like these are the kind of the foundational things that just help everything work better. So then in terms of, just give me a quick rundown on how it's going with exercise and incorporating more protein and all that. Like, has it been fairly straightforward for you, fairly simple?
It has been fairly simple. So what I've been doing as far as increasing my protein intake is like when I have a yogurt, I'll include my collagen powder in that. I, as part of my morning routine, I have my clean protein shake, which has about 20 grams of grass-fed protein, and just thinking of other ways throughout the day when I have snack time of how can I make it more of a high protein thing, have a boiled egg instead of going to the Oreo
The
or
Oreo.
something that's,
Oh, like the cookie.
Yeah,
My
right.
son has a stuffed animal that he labeled Oreos. So like this is just my own weird stuff. But you said Oreo, and I'm thinking of, I literally pictured his stuffed animal. So I had to clarify
Oh,
that it was a
wow.
cookie.
Yes, yes, yes. So reaching for like I've discovered that I really like canned sardines with mustard sauce and having that.
Amazing.
Yeah,
I
so
also
nobody
like
else in my
canned
house likes
sardines.
it.
Yes, we can be
Really?
weirdos together. I know,
Oh,
yeah. Because
awesome.
when I tell, especially when I was like newly pregnant and I was telling a friend, I was like, yeah, I just want sardines. And she's like, you are so weird.
Yes,
But
yes.
sardines,
So those,
I'll just put it out there. Sorry for anyone who's like, that is the most disgusting thing I've ever heard. So sardine, not that everyone has to eat them. Obviously, if you don't like them, don't force it down. But high in omega-3 fatty acids, small fish. That means low potential mercury exposure, that kind of thing. Good source of selenium. When you eat them in the can, they have the bone in, good source of calcium. Like it's actually, if you can tolerate it, it's actually a really great way to, it's like protein, omega-3, all the nutrients. It's actually, if you can do it, it's good. You don't have to do it though.
yes, 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 yeah, exactly. I like it. So I've been eating that. And so just like I said, just thinking of ways that I can just incorporate additional protein into my diet throughout the day,
Okay. So
and
that's really
boosting
good.
more.
I mean, yeah. So it sounds like you've been doing really good. And I would say in general, once the exercise, the 6 weeks is up, I would encourage
Yes.
you to continue to think that way about meals. So from a general standpoint, aiming for a source of protein, fat, and carbohydrates at each meal. You can opt for lower glycemic carbohydrates if you want to, because I know you had some goals that you're working on. But the
Mhm.
key is to, if you pack in the protein first, and then you have a source of fat, I find that you end up eating less Oreos. You still have the Oreos, right? But let's say what I often say to my clients, because I have a sweet tooth, and I definitely am like a recovering sugar addict. Up until my 20s, I was just like gummy candies. So I get it. I have no judgments. But what I found upon reflecting, now many years later that I've mostly kicked that habit, is that I was often hungry. Often when I'm eating a lot of sweets and stuff like that, like it's one thing when you have a little, couple Oreos, like when you're eating like half the bag, you're hungry. So if you pack in enough protein in your breakfast is key, obviously starting the day with balanced blood sugar, breakfast, lunch, and dinner with meals that have sufficient protein, with your snacks throughout the day that have sufficient protein, then at the end of the day, you're not like hungry, and you can have a couple Oreos because you like the taste. And it's, you know what I mean? So I feel like that's just a good thing to incorporate in general. The benefit for hormones with getting enough protein, especially when you're doing exercise, is that we do have research that shows that when we're under eating overall calories and or protein, that we don't have as good hormone production. So it's really important for that basic. We have to give our body the tools it needs to pump out the hormones that we want. So in addition to those things, so here is I'm just showing you, listeners can't see it, but I'm showing you one of the handouts here. So this goes through a lot of the foundational things that I talk about with clients to boost progesterone. One of the things I always say is that in my tool belt, I don't prescribe, like I'm not a doctor, I don't prescribe things. So I don't have progesterone pills to offer you. So in my tool belt, I have the specific lifestyle strategies and kind of foundational things to support, as well as a few supplements that can help to boost even further. So what I always say is that many women want to go straight to the supplement aspect of the conversation of like, what do I take to boost my progesterone? But without these foundational pieces in order, it's not going to be as effective, because the supplements kind of help to support your body when it's already in momentum. I mean, the analogy that just came to mind is like a train. If the train is already moving, we've got some momentum, so we can kind of build on that. The train is at the station. The supplements are they have to move this train from scratch, so they're not going to be as beneficial. So you can kind of see We've talked about some of these things which are doing really well. I don't think you're a big coffee drinker, if I remember correctly.
No, I can skip it if I need to. Like, I just would, it's more so get up in the morning, have something in a mug, and it's warm. So I've been switching it to like the teas and different things. So coffee was just a thing because it was what people do in the morning, and that's what you would have. But definitely making the switch to like the hibiscus tea or something that's a little bit more herbal in the sense, but still get that comfort morning thing that I still want to be able to have.
Yeah. And I mean, at this stage, because I think there was a time, I have it written down that you were doing coffee once a day. So at this stage, how many days a week?
For coffee?
Yeah.
Week, 2 to 3.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so alternatives, I think, so, I think in other episodes, I probably talked a little bit about coffee. So in general, if the cycle's great and we don't have any issues with progesterone and we don't have any concerns, then I'm not necessarily going to go there. But part of the reason I always bring up the coffee is, again, because it's an appetite suppressant, especially when we're looking to get enough protein and overall calories over exercising. My clients who do drink like 1, 2, 3 cups of coffee a day do tend to eat less, because even if you eat it after a meal, because it can suppress for the future meals. So that's something to think about. And in general, it can have over time a negative effect on overall hormone production that you don't really notice until you come off of it and have that like 1 week long coffee hangover. Just alternatives, because I also like a nice warm cup of something in the mornings, can be the herbal teas like you mentioned. Many of my clients switch to decaf because it's significantly less caffeine. I do think if you're trying to get off the caffeine, be aware that black teas and green teas still have caffeine in them. So it may be slightly less, but then you may put 3 tea bags in there, so it might not be. So yeah, so just things to keep in mind. And then in addition, I think a couple things I don't remember if we had spoken about, we might have. You're taking vitamin D, which is great to support egg quality, obviously, and we need vitamin D for a lot of different reasons. You may want to consider magnesium. Are you taking magnesium for any reason at this point?
No. But I can. I actually have like the topical spray, and I also have the magnesium I don't know how to say it properly.
Glycinate, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
In my cabinet.
Okay. Well, yeah. So we could talk a little bit about magnesium dosing. I mean, there's different ways to take it. Obviously, you could do an Epsom salt bath when you want, and that kind of thing. It's a great way to infuse the magnesium. Also, just to relax, especially before bed. I don't know if you're a bath person, but throwing a couple cups of Epsom salt into the tub, having a nice soak, you'll just feel amazing. Especially as you mentioned, you've got the pee thing, getting up to pee, but you also mentioned, tossing and turning. So many of my clients who take magnesium for other reasons, if they have period pain or if they're looking to reduce PMS symptoms or something like that, they'll often comment that it helps them to sleep better. So magnesium specifically is one of the ways we can boost progesterone production. So it's been well studied in PMS, which is associated with lower progesterone. And so it is associated with improving and boosting overall progesterone production, as well as vitamin C and vitamin B6. So there's a few different supplements that can kind of add to what you're doing already with the foundational factors. So I would definitely start there.
Okay.
And I feel like you've already laid the groundwork in a lot of ways. So this will just kind of give you that extra boost. And you'll be able to track your luteal phase. So, I mean, one of the good things about charting is that you can typically see if it's helping. So if you start to see that, extra day on the luteal phase, or in your case, your temperatures are in a good range. So for some of my clients, they might see the temperature post-ovulatory raise a little bit if it was a little bit low or something like that. But we should be able to kind of detect some benefits to this.
Okay.
As we chart.
Awesome.
So we will continue our discussion where we are going to have more hot seat sessions and more classes. So we'll go through your partner's sperm results. I know today in class, we are actually going to be talking about improving sperm quality. So we still have lots of great conversations to have. So as we wrap up today, a couple questions for you. I mean, the first question for someone who is considering fertility awareness charting, let's say they're in a similar situation to yourself where they've been trying to conceive and they just want to have a better understanding of their fertile window. What would you say to that person?
Yeah, what I would say to them is definitely do your research and really strongly consider the fertility awareness method, because it gives you more insight than just what you need. And I mean, it gives you all the things that you really need to get a baseline of understanding of being able to be successful in your conception journey. As you had mentioned in your classes before and on your podcasts, it is really truly your menstrual cycle is your fifth vital sign. And so having those observations give you the tools that you need in order to make fundamental changes if you need to, and be able to continue to use it to observe results. So that's definitely what I would say, is that it's above and beyond just a charting thing, just to know what your cycles are, but it also gives you the observations that you need in order for you to have optimal health.
Yeah, thank you for that. That is, I mean, it's so interesting when you get into it. Like, I obviously love nerding out about this stuff, but it really is fascinating. It's its own little modality that we just didn't know was happening each cycle that we can tap into, and it really is fascinating. I think that's why what I love about it is that it's not me saying, like, yeah, I'm saying a bunch of stuff, but in the practical application in the classes, working with women behind the scenes, I say stuff, sure, but really it's like, do we see the shift on the chart? And that's really what it is. And if we do stuff and we don't see that shift, then we know we need to do different stuff, or we need to kind of ramp it up a little bit or whatever. So it's this feedback system that is real time, that really does allow us to get a much deeper insight. And it's very unique to each person, because what comes clear quite quickly, even if you look in the group, everyone does not have the same cycle. Everyone isn't starting from the same point, and everyone doesn't respond to the same things. So for one woman, she might make change X, Y, and see this big improvement right away. For another woman, she might make the same change, but it's not exactly what she needs at this point. She has a different challenge, underlying challenge. So yes, I really appreciate that. And then in general, for someone who's thinking about taking the class and they're kind of like, what is it like talking to a group of women online about my cervical fluid? What would you have to say to her?
I would say it's absolutely awesome. Just being able to have that camaraderie and being able to know that you're not the only one, and gaining the knowledge of having the conversations and going through the lessons alongside you just makes a whole world of difference, because we're different women from all over. We have a shared experience of us just wanting to know more things and be better. So I definitely would encourage anyone to take your class, because it's beyond what you would even think that you would be able to have. It's just information that you'll be able to take along with you for your life. And that sense of being in the class together with other women just takes it to a whole nother level.
Oh, well, thank you for that too. You can tell that this is what I love to do. And I think also what I like about the class setting is that then, because I hear a lot of stories that have really changed the way I look at a lot of things in life. And I think that comes out on the podcast, because I do have an interesting perspective because of the work that I do. And I feel like the class allows me to share that with women, because then when you're there kind of hearing, and in our class, we have women in their 20s and 30s and 40s. And so I always think about that too, because when you're in your 20s and you get to so you're not in, most of my clients in their 20s are not necessarily in the, some of them are trying to conceive, some of them are planning for their weddings and things like that. So it's definitely a gamut at all ages. But at the same time, there's certain things that you see when you work with women who have had kids already, or they're postpartum, or, the different kind of collections of experiences that we share that really open your mind to a different way of talking about fertility. So anyways, I could go on for days, but I really do love it, because it's kind of my way of putting it out there. Like, our culture tells us that in your 20s, we should only be thinking about this. We should only be thinking about avoiding pregnancy, which we probably should if we're not trying to get pregnant. But it doesn't tell you to kind of plan for when you do. So really strong on that. I get really annoyed all the time. This gives me an opportunity to try to put in my 2 cents, like, yes, avoid, but have it in the back of your mind, please.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being here today, Serrita. This has been a pleasure, and I look forward to seeing you in class in a couple of minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please share it with a friend. You'll find the show notes page for today's episode over at fertilityfriday.com/492. I hope that you enjoyed today's episode with Serrita. It was such a great opportunity to dive a bit deeper into her story. And also, it really showcases the different applications of using fertility awareness, not only to ensure accurate timing, but to really dig deeper into what's happening in your cycle, to identify hormonal imbalances, and then to really give you the opportunity to strategize to improve. One of the things that I really appreciate about charting that I talk about, especially with my practitioners, is using the menstrual cycle as essentially a motivational tool for clients, because not only are you able to get a picture and a window of what's happening hormonally, but as you start to implement, make changes, make improvements, do the course correct things that you need to do to support your hormonal health, you start to get that feedback in real time. One of the questions that I often get asked is, how long does it take for you to start seeing the shifts, the changes? Do I have to wait several cycles, or what does this look like? And when you've actually addressed the issue, as I often say, when you've hit the nail on the head, you'll start to see those changes within either the cycle that you're in, but more often the next cycle. It doesn't mean that you're going to go from a cycle that's highly problematic to a perfect cycle right off the bat. But when you're moving in the right direction, you will actually see those changes in real time. You don't have to wait multiple cycles to see changes. When you start to do the right things to support your hormonal health, your cycle will reflect it. And it's just an incredibly empowering experience to be able to see some of those shifts within a short period of time based on the actions that you've taken. And so what I found is, when working with clients, it's really motivational. It's a completely different experience than going to a variety of care providers who are telling you that there's nothing you could do, and diet doesn't make it a difference, or all that stuff that you're looking at Dr. Google, like all that stuff doesn't make a difference, right? So if you've had kind of a negative experience and you haven't really been encouraged to take some of those matters into your own hands and make some of those changes yourself, charting can just be this incredible motivating experience where you actually see, wait a minute, no, I do have some agency here, because as I've been making these positive changes, I'm actually seeing these tangible changes to my cycles and to my charts and to my mucus production, to my luteal phase and to my moods and to my energy and to my PMS levels and etc. So it really does offer a unique window into what's going on, and also a great motivational tool for you. And so with that said, I hope you have a wonderful weekend whenever you're tuning into the show. And as a reminder, we are starting our next round of Fertility Awareness Mastery Live very shortly here. So if you're wanting to join us, head over to fertilityfriday.com/FAM. That's fertilityfriday.com/FAM for details. I hope to see you in our class. We're just starting within a couple of days here. So I hope to see you there. And I hope you have a wonderful weekend whenever you're tuning into the show. And of course, as always, until next time, be well and happy charting. And that's a wrap. If you're loving the FAM Practitioner series, then I know you'll love our Fertility Awareness Mastery Mentorship Program. It's a 9-month immersive experience that will completely transform the way you work with clients, allowing you to not only teach fertility awareness to your clients, but to use the menstrual cycle as a vital sign and diagnostic tool in your women's health practice. Our next class starts on October 4th, so there's still time to reserve your spot. Apply now at fertilityfriday.com/FAMLive, and when you apply, you'll have the opportunity to join one of our upcoming information sessions for additional details. There are no other programs like this offered anywhere. Transform your practice in 9 months. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/FAMLive to apply now. That's fertilityfriday.com/FAMMLIVE.